The jazz bar in downtown Chicago was dim and crowded, but the silence that followed her words cut through the noise like a jagged knife. "I'd rather sleep on the floor than sleep with you," she said, loud enough for her wealthy friends to hear, and I saw the smirks ripple around the table like a cruel wave. Most men would have overturned the table, but I simply finished my drink, stood up, and realized the woman sitting there was no longer my wife, but a stranger I had wasted 10 years on. If you want to witness how a man rebuilds himself from the ashes of humiliation into something untouchable, keep watching, because the best revenge isn't noise, it's success. The Air in Le Blanc, Chicago's trendiest French bistro, smelled of truffles and expensive perfume, a sharp contrast to the scent of cedar and drywall dust that I had scrubbed off my skin an hour ago. I sat at the edge of the circular booth, feeling the rough calluses of my palms snag against the silk tablecloth. It was the opening night of Gavin Reed's abstract sculpture exhibition. My wife, Jessica, sat across from me, glowing. Not because of me, but because she was the curator who had discovered him. She looked radiant in a black velvet dress, her laughter mingling with the clinking of crystal flutes. Gavin sat next to her, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair. Too casual. His fingers brushed her bare shoulder every time he emphasized a point about postmodern emptiness. "The problem with the working class," Gavin said, swirling his vintage Cabernet, "is that they lack imagination. They build boxes. Artists. We break them." The table chuckled. A group of gallery owners, critics, and trust fund kids. I took a sip of water. I had built the custom pedestals for Gavin's sculptures. I had worked 3 nights straight, unpaid, because Jessica said it would help her career. Liam wouldn't understand, Jessica said, her voice light, airy. She didn't look at me. She looked at Gavin. "He thinks art is something you match with a sofa." The laughter was louder this time. I felt a tightening in my chest, a familiar ache. "I think art needs a strong base, Jess," I said quietly. "Otherwise, it falls over." Gavin smirked, turning his gaze on me. It was predatory. "Liam, my good man, don't take it personally. We appreciate the muscle. Someone has to carry the heavy things, right?" He leaned in closer to Jessica, whispering something in her ear. She giggled, a flushed, breathless sound. "So, Liam," one of the critics asked, looking bored, "how's the construction business? Still hammering nails?" "I'm a foreman," I corrected, keeping my voice steady. "We're restoring the library on State Street." "How quaint," Jessica interrupted. She was drunk on attention, drunk on the proximity to Gavin's wealth. She looked at me with a sudden, sharp disdain, as if my presence was a stain on her perfect evening. "Let's not bore everyone with drywall stories, Liam. It's a party." "I'm just trying to make conversation, Jess," I said. "Well, don't," she snapped. The table went quiet. Then, Gavin, sensing the blood in the water, decided to twist the knife. "You know, Jess, you should stay at my loft tonight. We have early press interviews. The commute to the suburbs is such a killer." It was a blatant proposition. Disrespectful. Bold. I looked at my wife. I waited for her to be offended. I waited for her to defend our marriage, to tell him to back off. Instead, she swirled her wine, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe," she murmured. "Jessica," I said, my voice low. "We're going home together." She slammed her glass down. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the hushed restaurant. She turned to me, her eyes cold, stripped of any love that might have existed there 10 years ago. "God, you are so suffocating," she hissed. "Look at you. You don't fit here, Liam. You never have." "I'm your husband," I said. "And I'm tired," she spat out. "I'm tired of playing house in the suburbs with a man who comes home smelling like sweat and sawdust." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a cruel, clear whisper that everyone at the table, and the tables nearby, could hear. "Honestly, Liam, I'd rather sleep on the floor at Gavin's studio than sleep with you in that bed you made." The silence that followed was absolute. Gavin covered his mouth to hide a smirk, but his eyes danced with triumph. The critic looked away. The waiter froze with a tray of oysters. I looked at Jessica. I looked for a trace of regret, a sign that it was just the wine talking. But there was nothing. Only defiance. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the shimmer of the art world over the man who had built the very walls that sheltered her. Something inside me, a tether I had been holding on to for years, finally snapped. But it didn't snap with a bang. It snapped with a release. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I slowly unrolled my napkin and placed it on the table. I reached for my wallet, leather, worn, dusty, and pulled out $300. Enough to cover my meal and hers. I placed the cash under the wine glass. "Keep the change," I said to the table. I stood up. I looked down at Jessica one last time. "You won't have to worry about the bed anymore, Jess. It's all yours." I turned and walked toward the exit. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel the smirks returning. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the biting Chicago wind. The cold hit my face, shocking and clean. It felt like the first breath of air I had taken in years. I hailed a cab. "Union Station," I told the driver. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going home to pack. The cab ride to the suburbs was quiet, the rhythmic thumping of the tires over the highway expansion joints acting as a countdown. When the driver pulled up to the two-story colonial on Elm Street, the house was dark. Of course it was. Jessica wouldn't be back for hours. She was likely holding court at an after-party in a loft in Wicker Park, retelling the story of her boorish husband to a fresh audience of sympathetic listeners. I tipped the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the house. I had bought this place as a foreclosure 7 years ago. It had been a rotting shell then. I remembered the smell of mold and wet plaster. I remembered the first night we slept on a mattress on the floor in the living room because the upstairs subfloor wasn't safe yet. Jessica had laughed then, drinking cheap beer out of a plastic cup, telling me I was her hero for fixing the leak in the roof. Now, the siding was pristine white, the porch railing was custom-milled mahogany, and the landscaping was manicured to perfection. It was a beautiful house. It was a perfect stage for a life that no longer existed. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence of the house was different from the silence in the restaurant. This silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of arguments and the quiet erosion of intimacy. I didn't turn on the main lights. The street lamps filtering through the sheer curtains provided enough illumination. I walked up the stairs, my boots heavy on the oak treads I had sanded and stained myself. In the master bedroom, the scent of her perfume, something floral and sharp, lingered in the air. Her clothes were strewn across the chaise lounge I had built for her birthday. A red silk scarf, a discarded pair of heels. I pulled my old canvas duffel bag from the back of the closet. I didn't pack spitefully. I didn't sweep her things off the dresser or cut the clothes she loved. That was what a weaker man would do. I moved with the efficiency of a foreman clearing a job site. I packed my work boots, my jeans, the flannel shirts she hated because she said they made me look like a lumberjack. I packed my sketchbook, the one filled with furniture designs she called quaint. I reached for the watch she had given me for our 5th anniversary. A sleek, delicate thing that looked good on a wrist that never did manual labor. I held it for a second, feeling the cold metal, then set it back down on the dresser. I didn't take it. I didn't take the Italian suits she had insisted I buy for her gallery openings. I left them hanging in the closet, empty skins of the man she wanted me to be. I zipped the bag. It wasn't full. 10 years of marriage, and everything that truly belonged to me fit into a single carry-on. I walked back downstairs and into the garage. This was the hardest part. My workshop. The smell of sawdust and wood glue hit me, a comfort I hadn't realized I was starving for. I took my essential tools, my grandfather's chisel, my favorite hammer, the Japanese pull saw. I couldn't take the table saw or the lathe. I had to leave them. I loaded the duffel and the tool crate into my truck parked in the driveway. The engine turned over with a rough, throaty rumble that shattered the suburban quiet. I went back inside one last time. I stood in the kitchen. I ran my hand over the quartz countertop. I had installed this slab 2 years ago, careful not to crack the stone. It was cold under my palm. I took my house key off the ring. It was a simple brass key, but it felt like it weighed 50 pounds. I didn't write a note. I didn't leave a letter explaining my hurt, or my anger, or my reasons. Words would just give her something to analyze, something to mock with Gavin. Words were fuel for her drama. Silence was a vacuum. Silence would haunt her. I placed the key on the center of the island. The metal clicked against the stone, a tiny, final sound. I walked out the front door and closed it. I didn't lock it. I didn't have the key anymore. As I backed the truck out of the driveway, I didn't look up at the bedroom window. I put the truck in drive and headed toward the city, toward the gritty, industrial south side where the rent was cheap and the noise of the trains would drown out the quiet ringing in my ears. The house shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just a pinprick of light, and then it was gone. It was nearly 3 a.m. when Gavin's matte black Porsche idled at the curb. He didn't turn off the engine. He didn't get out to open her door. He simply leaned over, kissed her cheek with a touch that felt more like a stamp of ownership than affection, and said, "Sleep well, darling. Big day tomorrow." Jessica watched his taillights dissolve into the suburban mist before turning toward the house. She braced herself. Her shoulders tightened under her velvet coat. She had rehearsed this scene in her head during the ride home. Liam would be waiting in the living room, sitting in the dark like a wounded animal. He would cry, or he would yell, or he would beg. She was ready for the noise. She was ready to be the calm, superior one who explained that people just grow apart. She fished her keys from her clutch, her fingers fumbling slightly from the wine. She slid the key into the lock and twisted. The mechanism turned with zero resistance. The deadbolt wasn't engaged. That was the first crack in her script. Liam always locked the deadbolt. He was obsessive about security, about checking the perimeter, about keeping things safe. She pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. "Liam," she called out. Her voice sounded thin, swallowed instantly by the vast, open-concept living room. Silence. Not the silence of sleep, but the dense, stagnant silence of vacancy. She walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor, a sound that usually annoyed Liam because he worried about scuff marks. Tonight, there was no one to be annoyed. The kitchen was spotless. The counters were wiped down. And there, sitting squarely in the center of the quartz island, was a single brass key. Jessica stopped. She stared at the key for a long time. It looked small, harmless, yet it radiated a finality that made her stomach turn. She looked around. The coffee pot wasn't prepped for the morning. The mail wasn't stacked on the side table. She walked to the foot of the stairs and looked up. "Liam," she said again, louder this time. Nothing. She climbed the stairs, her heart beating a strange, erratic rhythm. She went into the master bedroom and flipped on the switch. The light was harsh. The bed was made, perfectly, tightly made, the way he did it, not the messy way she did. She opened the closet. His side was bare. The wooden hangers were all there, spaced evenly, swinging slightly from the draft of the opening door. No flannel shirts. No worn denim. No boots. He was gone. Jessica sat down on the edge of the bed. She waited for the panic to hit. She waited for the grief. But instead, a slow, warm wave of relief washed over her. He hadn't fought. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply vanished. She kicked off her heels and fell back onto the mattress. She stared at the ceiling. For years, she had felt weighed down by his practicality, by his simple needs, by his lack of ambition. She had felt like a racehorse tied to a plow. Now, the rope was cut. "I'm free," she whispered to the empty room. She rolled over and grabbed her phone. She texted Gavin. "He's gone. Moved out. It's over." 3 dots appeared. Then a message. "Good. Now we can really begin." Jessica smiled. She got up and went to the bathroom to wash her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired, but she told herself she looked victorious. She turned the faucet handle. The water sputtered for a second, then flowed. A tiny drip started at the base of the handle, A microscopic leak Liam had been meaning to fix this weekend. Plink, plink. Jessica ignored it. She turned off the light, leaving the drip echoing in the dark. She climbed into the center of the bed, spreading her arms out wide, claiming the space. She closed her eyes, telling herself that the silence wasn't lonely, it was spacious. She slept deeply, unaware that the house around her was no longer a home, but merely a structure that had just lost its spine. The studio apartment was in Bridgeport, sandwiched between a meatpacking warehouse and the constant, rhythmic clatter of the CTA Orange Line. It was a single room with exposed brick that wept condensation in the mornings and a radiator that hissed like a dying animal but produced no heat. It cost a fraction of the mortgage I used to pay, but the price was the damp cold that settled into your bones and stayed there. I didn't mind the cold. The cold kept me awake. For the first month, I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. I didn't have a bed frame, just a mattress on the floor that smelled of the previous tenant's cigarettes. I didn't unpack the few boxes I had brought. There was no point in decorating a bunker. I threw myself into the work with a violence that frightened the younger guys on my crew. I took every overtime shift available. I took the weekend jobs. I took the hazard pay gigs that involved hanging off scaffolding in the biting Chicago wind to tuck point crumbling masonry on high rises. Liam, you trying to kill yourself, man? Tony, my site supervisor, asked one Tuesday. We were 12 stories up, the wind whipping off Lake Michigan at 30 miles an hour. My hands were raw inside my gloves, the skin cracked and bleeding near the knuckles. Just saving up, Tony, I said, chipping away at a loose mortar joint. You look like hell, Tony said, lighting a cigarette and cupping his hand against the wind. Go home. Get some sleep. I'm fine. I wasn't fine. I was hollow, but the physical exhaustion was a drug. When my shoulders burned from hauling 80-pound bags of concrete, I didn't think about Jessica. When my lungs ached from the silica dust and the freezing air, I didn't hear the echo of her laughter at the bistro. Pain was simple. Pain was honest. It had a beginning and an end. Betrayal didn't. I stopped looking at my phone. I canceled my social media accounts. I became a ghost in the city I had lived in for 30 years. One night, 3 weeks after I left, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, eating a cold sandwich from the gas station. My muscles were twitching involuntarily from fatigue. The only light came from the street lamp outside the window. My phone buzzed on the floorboards. It was a notification from the shared bank account, the one I hadn't closed yet because the automatic mortgage payments were linked to it. Transaction, $450. 00, Le Blanc Bistro. Transaction, $1,200. 00, the Drake Hotel. She was living it up. She was celebrating her freedom. I stared at the glowing screen. A younger version of me would have felt a spike of jealousy. But now, I looked at the numbers and felt nothing but a cold resolve. She was spending money we didn't have, burning through the equity of the house I built. I put the sandwich down. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank's automated service. In the dim light of the studio, with the train rumbling overhead, I navigated the menu options. Transfer funds. Close account. It took 10 minutes. I transferred my half of the savings, what little there was, into a new, separate account. I left her half, to the penny. I wasn't a thief, but I wasn't a sponsor anymore, either. When the operator confirmed the account was closed, I hung up. The silence returned, heavier than before. I stood up, my knees popping. I walked over to the corner where I kept my drafting table, a makeshift thing I had cobbled together from scrap plywood and sawhorses. I turned on the clamp light. I didn't sketch furniture that night. I didn't sketch gazebos or porches. I took a fresh sheet of paper and a heavy charcoal pencil. I began to draw lines that were sharp, aggressive, and imposing. Steel, glass, concrete. Structures that didn't apologize for taking up space. Structures that couldn't be broken. I worked until the sun came up, my hands stained black with charcoal, my eyes burning. I wasn't just drawing a building. I was drawing the blueprint for the man I was going to become. The softwood was gone. It was time to build with steel. Six months into her liberation, Jessica stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring up at the ceiling. The small, rhythmic drip she had ignored on the night Liam left had metastasized. It was no longer a sound. It was a scar. A brown, jagged water stain had spread across the pristine white drywall like a bruise, and now, a steady bead of water was dropping onto the quartz island, splashing right where Liam's key had once rested. She grabbed a ceramic bowl, one of the expensive ones from their wedding registry, and slid it under the leak. Plink. The sound was louder than before. It sounded like a clock counting down. "Gavin," she called out, though she knew the answer before she heard it. "Busy, babe," came the shout from the living room. She walked in. Gavin was lounging on the sofa. Her sofa, wearing only his boxer briefs, sketching on an iPad. He didn't look up. The room was a mess. Empty wine bottles from 3 nights ago, takeout containers, and art supplies cluttered the coffee table Liam had built. The coaster set was buried under a pile of magazines. A wet glass sat directly on the wood, leaving a white ring. "The ceiling is leaking," Jessica said, trying to keep the shrillness out of her voice. "I think a pipe burst in the master bath." Gavin didn't stop sketching. "So call a plumber." "Why are you telling me?" "Because it's a mess, Gavin. And it's going to be expensive." He finally looked up, his expression bored. "Don't be so domestic, Jess. It kills the vibe. Just hire someone. That's what money is for." He went back to his screen. Jessica felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks. That's what money is for. Gavin had plenty of family money, but he never spent it on boring things like bills or repairs. He spent it on vintage absinthe and studio rent. Since he had practically moved in, he hadn't paid for a single utility bill. She walked back to the kitchen and dialed the number for a 24-hour plumbing service. The dispatcher sounded tired. "Emergency call-out is $150 just to show up, ma'am. Plus parts and labor." "Fine," Jessica snapped. "Just get someone here." While she waited, she opened the mail. It had been piling up. Past due notices for the electric bill. A warning from the city about the uncut grass. Liam used to handle all of this on Sunday mornings with a cup of coffee and a spreadsheet. He made it look invisible. She realized now that his invisibility was the only thing holding her world together. When the plumber arrived, a burly man who smelled like stale tobacco and looked nothing like Liam, he spent 20 minutes banging around upstairs before coming down with a grim look. Seal on the toilet wax ring is gone, and the subfloor is rotted out. "Whoever installed this toilet didn't seat it right," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "My husband, my ex, he built this house," Jessica defended instinctively, then bit her lip. "Well, things break if you don't maintain 'em, lady. Gonna run you about $600 to patch it up for now. You want me to proceed?" Jessica nodded, defeated. She pulled out the debit card from her wallet, the blue card connected to the joint account she and Liam shared. She hadn't checked the balance in weeks, assuming Liam was still depositing his paycheck out of habit or obligation. The plumber swiped the card on his mobile reader. Beep. He frowned. Declined. Jessica froze. "Try it again." "That's impossible." Beep. "Declined again, ma'am. Insufficient funds or account closed." The cold reality washed over her. She pulled up her banking app. The screen refreshed, spinning for an agonizing second before showing the balance, $0. Status, closed. He hadn't just left the house. He had severed the lifeline. "Do you have another card?" the plumber asked, impatient. Jessica fumbled for her personal credit card, the one already maxed out from the trip to Cabo with Gavin last month. She handed it over, praying. It went through, but she knew she was dangerously close to the limit. When the plumber left, the house was quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. The bowl was still on the counter, catching the last few drops. She walked back into the living room. Gavin was asleep now, the iPad resting on his chest, mouth slightly open. He looked like a child. Useless. Beautiful, but useless. She looked at the white ring on the coffee table, the permanent damage to the wood Liam had sanded by hand. She reached down and wiped the condensation away with her sleeve, but the mark remained. For the first time in 6 months, Jessica didn't feel superior. She felt exposed. The roof was leaking, the money was gone, and the man sleeping on her couch wouldn't know how to hold a hammer if his life depended on it. She shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter, realizing that the winter draft wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the empty space beside her. Underscore 2 years later, the noise of the CTA train was gone, replaced by the hum of industrial-grade air filters and the sharp whine of a CNC router. I stood in the center of the warehouse I had leased in the West Loop. It was an old textile factory, bricks scrubbed clean, high timber ceilings exposed. On the frosted glass of the front door, the gold lettering read, Cross and Timber, Custom Millwork and Design. I wasn't wearing a flannel shirt. I was wearing a charcoal button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows, tucked into dark denim. My boots were still work boots, but they were clean, Red Wing leather, not caked in mud. Mr. Cross. I turned. Elias Thorne, one of the city's most aggressive real estate developers, stood in the entryway. He was a man who chewed up contractors for breakfast, known for suing anyone who missed a deadline by an hour. He looked around the shop, his eyes scanning the orderly rows of tools, the stacks of black walnut and white oak drying in the climate-controlled bay. Mr. Thorne, I said, extending my hand. My grip was firm, my palm still calloused, but no longer rough. Your proposal for the penthouse on Wacker Drive, Thorne said, skipping the pleasantries. He threw a thick folder onto my drafting table. It's 40% higher than the other bids. I know, I said. I didn't blink. I didn't offer a discount. Why? Thorne challenged. It's just wood, Cross. Why should I pay you a premium for cabinetry? I walked over to a workbench where a finished console table sat, waiting for delivery. It was made of rift-sawn white oak, the grain continuous, wrapping around the corners like a waterfall. It looked simple, but the engineering required to make wood behave like water was agonizingly complex. I ran my hand along the edge. Because other contractors will use veneer and particle board to save you money, and in 5 years, the humidity off the lake will make it peel. You're selling $10 million condos, Mr. Thorne. If the cabinets warp, your clients won't blame the wood. They'll blame you. I looked him in the eye. I build things that outlive the owner. That's the premium. Thorne stared at me. He was looking for the weakness, the hesitation I used to have when Jessica would critique my clothes or my ambition. He didn't find it. The 2 years of 18-hour days, of eating dinner alone at a drafting table, of silencing the voice that said I wasn't enough, had forged something hard inside me. I was no longer the wood that bent. I was the iron that held it in place. Thorne smirked. It was a small, grudging acknowledgement of respect. You're an arrogant son of a bitch, aren't you? He said. I'm accurate, I replied. He pulled a fountain pen from his suit pocket and signed the cover page of the proposal. Do it. But if you're one day late, I invoke the penalty clause. I won't be late. As Thorne left, his heels clicking on the concrete, I didn't celebrate. I didn't pump my fist. I simply exhaled. I walked back to my office, a glass-walled enclosure overlooking the shop floor. My phone sat on the desk. It was a new model. I sat down and opened my email. There was a message from Architectural Digest. They wanted to feature Cross and Timber in their Chicago's New Artisans issue. They wanted a photo of me. I leaned back in my chair. 2 years ago, I was eating gas station sandwiches on a floor mattress. Now, I was signing 6-figure contracts. I thought about Jessica. The memory of her was less like a stab wound now and more like an old injury that ached only when it rained. I wondered if she was happy. I wondered if the art she chased was keeping her warm. I looked at the drafting paper in front of me. I picked up my pencil. I had a penthouse to build. The silence of my life was no longer empty. It was focused. And it was lucrative. The gallery owner. A woman named Sloane who wore geometric glasses and smiled with too many teeth didn't even offer Jessica a seat. "It's just the market, darling," Sloane said, adjusting a piece of driftwood art on her desk that cost more than a Honda Civic. "Contemporary abstract is out. Neorealism is in. And frankly, your curation style feels a bit. We need fresh eyes. Young eyes." Jessica stood in the center of the polished concrete floor, clutching her Celine bag, a knockoff she had bought online because she couldn't afford the real one anymore. "I discovered Gavin Reed," she said, her voice trembling. "I put this gallery on the map." "Gavin Reed is yesterday's news," Sloane said, not looking up from her laptop. "Pack your desk, Jessica. Leave your badge with security." The walk to her car felt like a funeral procession. The Chicago wind had turned cruel again, whipping through her thin coat. She drove home, to the house on Elm Street that she had fought to keep in the divorce settlement, mostly out of spite. When she pulled into the driveway, the reality of her victory stared back at her. The lawn, once manicured by Liam every Saturday, was knee-high and choked with weeds. The white siding was streaked with green algae. A shutter on the second floor hung crookedly, banging softly against the frame with every gust of wind. The house looked like it was dying. She unlocked the front door. The air inside was stale. The heat was set to 60 degrees to save money, but the chill still seeped through the floorboards. "Gavin," she called out. She found him in the dining room. He wasn't painting. He was packing. 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases stood by the door. He was wrapping a canvas in bubble wrap, a painting of a distorted, screaming face. "Going on a trip?" Jessica asked, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Gavin looked up. He looked younger, healthier than he had in months. He had that gleam in his eye, the same gleam he had when he first looked at her across the dinner table 5 years ago. "I'm moving to Berlin," he said casually. "The scene there is raw. Chicago is dead." "Berlin," Jessica repeated. "When were you going to tell me?" "I just did," he said, zipping a bag. "Look, Jess, it's been intense. But I need a muse, not a manager. And lately, the energy here is just heavy. It's depressing. You're depressing." "I lost my job today," she whispered. Gavin paused, then shrugged. "See, heavy energy. I can't have that around my process." He picked up his bags. He didn't hug her. He didn't offer to help with the bills that were stacked on the counter, the mortgage notices, the property tax warnings. He walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture he had decided not to buy. "Good luck with the house," he said over his shoulder. "It's got good bones," or whatever Liam used to say. The door clicked shut. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, identical to the sound of Liam leaving years ago, but entirely different in weight. Liam's departure had been a withdrawal of support. Gavin's was a disposal of waste. Jessica sank onto the floor. She looked around the room. The paint was peeling in the corner. The floorboards were dull. The house was too big. It was a monster that ate money and required care she didn't know how to give. 2 days later, the realtor came. She was a brisk, no-nonsense woman who walked through the rooms with a clipboard, making sking sounds. "It's a shame," the realtor said, standing in the kitchen. "The craftsmanship is incredible. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. But the neglect, the water damage in the ceiling, the warped flooring, the rot on the back deck. You're looking at a short sale, Jessica. You're going to walk away with nothing after the bank takes their share." "I want to list it high," Jessica said stubbornly. "You can't," the realtor said, looking at the water stain that was now a black mold bloom. "You let the foundation rot. Honey, you're lucky if you break even." Jessica signed the papers on the kitchen island, the same island where the key had been left. She realized then that she hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost the architect of her life. She had traded a builder for a painter, and now she was left with nothing but a crumbling frame and a canvas full of lies. She packed her things into cardboard boxes from the liquor store. She wasn't moving to a loft or a penthouse. She was moving to a one-bedroom rental in a fading neighborhood near the airport. As she drove away for the last time, she didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the house standing there, wounded and gray, a monument to everything she had taken for granted and everything she had failed to maintain. Underscore 5 years is enough time for a cell to regenerate, for a forest to begin recovering from a fire, and for a man to kill the parts of himself that can be hurt. Liam Cross stood on the 52nd floor of the Helix, Chicago's newest residential spire overlooking the Chicago River. The wind at this altitude was fierce, a relentless force that used to cut through his canvas Carhartt jacket like a razor. Today, however, it merely ruffled the hem of his bespoke navy suit, Italian wool, tailored on Seville Row to fit a frame that was leaner, harder, and more imposing than the man who had once carried lumber for a living. He wasn't holding a hammer. He was holding a flute of sparkling water, standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, looking down at the city that looked like a circuit board from this height. Mr. Cross. The voice belonged to Marcus, the project manager for the development group. Marcus was 40, experienced, and currently sweating through his shirt despite the climate-controlled air. Liam turned slowly. He didn't speak immediately. He had learned that silence made people nervous, and nervous people told the truth. The millwork in the penthouse library, Marcus stammered slightly. The supplier says the Brazilian walnut is backordered. They want a substitute with stained oak. They say no one will notice the difference. Liam walked over to the center of the room, his leather Oxfords making a sharp, authoritative click on the marble floors. He looked at Marcus, his expression unreadable. Do you know why this unit costs $12 million, Marcus? Liam asked softly. Because of the view? No, Liam said. The view is free. Anyone with a drone can see this. They are paying for the things they can touch. They are paying for the assurance that there are no lies in the walls. He set his glass down on a temporary table. If the walnut is backordered, we wait. We do not substitute. We do not stain oak and pretend it is something else. That is a cheap trick for cheap houses. But the timeline, Marcus started. The timeline moves. Liam cut him off, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming colder. Perfection does not. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. I'll make the call. Good. As Marcus scurried away to yell at a vendor, a woman stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. It was Evelyn, a senior writer for Chicago Business. She had been shadowing him for 3 days for a cover story titled The Man Who Rebuilt the Skyline. You're hard on them, Evelyn observed, clicking her pen. I'm precise, Liam corrected. There's a difference. Evelyn walked to the window, standing beside him. You know, the research on you is fascinating, Liam. 5 years ago, you were a ghost. No digital footprint. Just a small LLC for carpentry. Then, suddenly, you're buying warehouses. You're partnering with the biggest firms. You're designing the interiors for the wealthiest people in the Midwest. What changed? Liam looked out at the gray horizon of the lake. He saw the faint outline of the suburbs in the distance. A blurry haze where a colonial house sat rotting with a short sale sign on the lawn. He felt nothing. No anger. No nostalgia. Just a remote awareness of a past life, like remembering a movie he saw once. I stopped building for people who wanted a home, Liam said, turning back to the writer. And I started building for people who wanted a fortress. Is that what this is? Evelyn gestured to the cold, impeccable luxury around them. A fortress? It's armor, Liam said. Success is just a high wall you build so no one can see you bleed. Evelyn stopped writing. She looked at him, trying to find the crack in the facade, the human warmth beneath the starch and the steel. She found none. His eyes were the color of the river in winter, slate gray and absolutely still. You're a very intimidating man, Mr. Cross, she said quietly. I'm a busy one, Liam replied, checking his watch. A Patek Philippe that cost more than his father made in a lifetime. I have a bid meeting at the Four Seasons for the Gallery District renovation. If you'll excuse me. He walked toward the private elevator, his stride long and purposeful. He didn't look back at the view. He didn't care about the beauty of the city. He only cared about the structure, the bones, the steel, the unyielding strength of things that could not be broken by a change of heart. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing him in a box of mirrored steel, Liam Cross adjusted his cuffs. He was ready for the next conquest. He had no idea that the past was currently sitting in the lobby of that very building, holding a manila envelope and praying for a miracle. The lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel smelled of white tea and old money. Jessica stood near the concierge desk, clutching a heavy leather portfolio case against her chest. Her knuckles were white. She wasn't a guest. She was an employee of City Run Couriers, a job she had taken 3 months ago because it paid cash and didn't ask questions about her credit score. She wore a generic gray blazer that was a size too big, bought from a thrift store, and sensible black flats that pinched her toes. Her hair, once highlighted at a salon on Michigan Avenue every 6 weeks, was pulled back into a severe, messy bun to hide the roots. "Mr. Cross is in the boardroom," the concierge said, not making eye contact. "He said to bring the bid documents up immediately. He's on a tight schedule." Jessica nodded, swallowing the lump of anxiety in her throat. She didn't know who Mr. Cross was. She didn't care. To her, he was just another suit, another faceless tyrant in a city full of them. She just needed the signature so she could get paid and pay her rent. She took the elevator to the conference level. The door slid open to reveal a hallway lined with silk wallpaper and soft lighting. She walked toward the double mahogany doors at the end of the corridor. She knocked. "Enter," a voice called out. The voice stopped her cold. It was deep, resonant, and terrifyingly familiar. But it couldn't be. That voice belonged to a man who wore flannel and smelled of pine. This voice sounded like it belonged to the room. Expensive, polished, and commanding. She pushed the door open. The boardroom was vast, dominated by a long table that looked like a slab of black ice. At the far end, silhouetted against the window that framed the skyline he was helping to build, sat a man. He was reviewing a blueprint, a gold fountain pen in his hand. He wore a navy suit that fit him with surgical precision. His shoulders were broader than she remembered, filling out the fabric in a way that spoke of discipline, not just labor. His hair was cut short, sharp styled. He looked up. Jessica felt the air leave her lungs. It was Liam, but it wasn't the Liam she had left. That Liam had soft eyes and a hesitant smile. This man had a face carved from granite. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and devoid of any warmth. She stood frozen in the doorway, the heavy portfolio dragging her arm down. She wanted to turn and run. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The shame was a physical heat, burning up her neck. Here she was, the woman who had mocked his dirty job, now standing before him as a glorified delivery girl while he sat at the head of the table. Liam didn't gasp. He didn't stand up in shock. He didn't say her name. He simply watched her, his gaze traveling from her frayed collar to her scuffed shoes, then back to her face. It was a clinical assessment, like an architect inspecting a building that had failed its structural audit. "You have the documents for the gallery renovation?" he asked. His voice was even. No tremor. No anger. Just business. Jessica tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She nodded, stepping forward on shaky legs. She felt small. Incredibly, painfully small. She reached the table and slid the portfolio toward him. Her hand trembled violently. Liam watched her hand. He saw the bare ring finger. He saw the chipped nail polish. He looked up at her eyes, which were wide with panic and a desperate, silent plea for acknowledgement, for him to scream, to laugh, to do something human. He didn't. He opened the portfolio. He scanned the first page. He uncapped his pen. A Mont Blanc, she noticed, remembering how he used to use carpenter pencils, and signed his name at the bottom in a fluid, sharp stroke. Liam Cross. He closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. "Thank you," he said. "You can go." That was it. You can go. Not "how are you?" Not "I missed you." Not "I hate you." He was dismissing her. He was treating her exactly as she appeared, a courier, a stranger, a nobody. Jessica stood there for one agonizing second longer, waiting for the crack in the ice, waiting for him to realize it was her, the love of his life, the woman who had broken him. But Liam had already turned back to his blueprint. He was checking a measurement. He had already moved on. Tears pricked her eyes, hot, humiliating tears. She grabbed the portfolio, clutching it like a shield, and turned around. She walked to the door, her shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "Wait," Liam said. Jessica stopped. Her heart leaped. Here it comes, she thought. The anger. The confrontation. She turned back, hope and fear warring in her chest. Liam didn't look up. He pointed a finger at the door handle. "Close the door behind you," he said. "There's a draft." Jessica stepped into the hallway and pulled the heavy door shut. The click of the latch was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She leaned against the silk wallpaper, sliding down until she hit the floor, burying her face in her hands as the realization crashed over her. He hadn't just gotten over her. He had outgrown her. And that was a fate far worse than being hated. Underscore. Inside the boardroom. The silence that followed the clicking of the latch was absolute. The three other executives at the table, men worth billions combined, shifted in their leather chairs. They were sharks, trained to smell blood in the water. They had seen the woman's shaking hands. He scanned the numbers, his mind operating with the cold efficiency of a CNC machine. He found an error in the third paragraph, circled it, and pushed the paper across the black table. "Fix this," he ordered, "and we have a deal." In that moment, Liam realized the truth. He hadn't been acting. He hadn't been holding his breath. He truly, deeply did not care. The woman who had once held the power to destroy him with a single sentence was now just a logistical hiccup in his Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't hatred. It was worse. It was obsolescence. Out in the hallway, Jessica pressed her back against the silk wallpaper, trying to command her legs to stop shaking. She could hear his voice through the heavy mahogany doors. It was muffled, but distinct. It was steady. He's not coming out, she thought. He's not pacing. He's not angry. She had expected him to storm out, to demand what she was doing there, to ask why she looked so run down. She had prepared a speech, a mix of apology and defense. She wanted to tell him that the art world was fickle, that Gavin was a narcissist, that she had made a mistake. She wanted to see the pain in his eyes that proved she still mattered. But all she heard was the murmur of negotiation. She pushed herself off the wall. She walked toward the elevator, her reflection in the brass trim mocking her. The gray blazer looked shapeless. Her hair looked frizzy. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had bet everything on status and lost. She pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding. She stepped inside alone. As the car descended, a desperate, clawing need took hold of her. She couldn't leave. Not like this. Not as a ghost. She needed him to look at her. Really look at her. One more time. She needed to know if the man who used to build her bookshelves, the man who used to warm her car up in the winter, was truly dead. She wouldn't leave the building. She would wait in the lobby. She would force him to acknowledge the history they shared, even if she had to beg. The elevator doors opened onto the opulent lobby of the Four Seasons. Jessica walked over to a velvet armchair near the main revolving doors. She sat down, clutching her empty courier bag, and fixed her eyes on the elevator bank. She waited. Above her, on the 52nd floor, Liam Cross stood up and shook hands with the investors. He had just closed a $20 million contract. He checked his watch. He had a dinner reservation at Alinea. He picked up his briefcase. He didn't know she was waiting. And if he had known, he wouldn't have walked faster or slower. He would have walked exactly the same pace. The pace of a man who owes nothing to the past. The elevator chimed, and Liam stepped out into the lobby. He was buttoning his suit jacket, his eyes scanning the room for his driver, who was usually waiting by the revolving doors. Liam. The voice was shaky, desperate, and came from his left. He stopped. He didn't turn his whole body, just his head. Jessica was standing by a velvet armchair, clutching her courier bag like a life preserver. She looked out of place amongst the tourists in their furs and businessmen in their trenches. She looked like a rough draft in a room full of finished masterpieces. He turned fully to face her, his expression polite but distant. Jessica. She took a step forward, emboldened by the fact that he hadn't walked away yet. I waited for you. I needed to explain. Liam checked his watch. I have a dinner reservation in 20 minutes. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Just 2 minutes. Liam, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. She looked at him, searching for the man who used to hold her when she cried. Gavin left me. The gallery fired me. I lost the house, Liam. The house you built. It's going to foreclosure. I'm living in a studio by the airport. I have nothing. She let the words hang in the air, a heavy offering of misery, expecting him to pick it up. That was the dynamic they always had. She created the mess, and he fixed it. She broke the glass. He swept up the shards. Liam looked at her. He saw the fraying threads of her blazer. He saw the lines of exhaustion around her eyes. He felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't love, and it wasn't hate. It was pity. The kind of pity you feel for a stranger's car accident as you drive past it on the highway. Tragic, but not your wreck. I know, Liam said softly. Jessica's eyes widened with a spark of hope. You know? I bought the debt on the house, Liam said. His voice was matter of fact. I bought the note from the bank last week. I'm tearing it down. Jessica recoiled as if he had slapped her. What? You're tearing it down? But you built it. You built it for us. I built it for a wife who didn't exist, Liam corrected. The foundation was bad, Jessica. You said it yourself that night at the bistro. You wanted to sleep on the floor? Now you can. Liam, don't be cruel, she whispered, tears spilling over. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can't we just get coffee? Can't we just talk? I miss you. Liam looked at her, and for a second, the mask slipped. He looked tired. You don't miss me, Jess. You miss the safety. You miss the man who fixed the leaks. He took a step back. I'm not a carpenter anymore. I don't fix broken things. I replace them. He turned away from the main exit. He walked toward a separate bank of elevators marked private residences. He pulled a black key card from his pocket and swiped it against the sensor. The light turned green. Liam, she called out, her voice rising, causing a bellman to look over. Where are you going? He stepped into the elevator. He pressed the button for the penthouse. He looked at her one last time as the doors began to slide shut. She was standing in the middle of the lobby, small, gray, and anchored to the ground. I'm going up, he said. The doors closed, sealing him inside the golden box. As the elevator ascended, rising smoothly past the lobby, past the street noise, past the level where he used to live, Liam Cross loosened his tie. He watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30, 50. He walked to the glass wall of his penthouse, looking out at the sprawling city of Chicago. The lights were coming on, a million glittering stars in the grid below. Somewhere down there, in the dark, was a house that was about to be demolished. But up here, the view was clear. He took a deep breath. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was vast. It was his. And for the first time in 5 years, it was finally peaceful.